When the boat got to England, the former prisoners were re-evaluated for possible further military service. Remember that hand wound from when Peter was going up to Oswego in January? Well, those two fingers weren't any more functional than they were before. Peter was marked unfit for service and given what amounts to an honorable discharge. His final pay from the Royal Army was 6 shillings. So it's November of 1756. Peter is in a completely new place, in a country that he has only ever spent his childhood in. It must have felt tiring being at the end of the war and having only 6 shillings to build a new life from, but at the same time, sort of freeing. He had no prior engagements, nothing was tying him down to any particular spot. He could go anywhere in the world he could walk to. Well, his first idea for a place to walk to was his childhood home. How far was it exactly? About 1,000 kilometers, give or take. A little under 600 miles. Well, I hope he had good shoes. He ended up walking most of the way through England before he ran out of money in York. While he's in York, though, he had a stroke of luck. He wasn't shy about telling his whole story of the marvelous adventure he had. One of the people who happens to overhear the story is a gentleman of the city who works in a publishing house. He asked Peter to put the story down on paper so he could print it in book form. The result of this is the book that I've been citing on all the other videos about Peter's life. Or at least the very first edition of it. I've been reading a later edition. The book sells 1,000 copies, and Peter earns a good £30 from it. More than enough to get him where he needs to go. Peter also takes quite a few copies of the book with him on his further trek north. In every town he stops in, he dresses up like an Indian, tells the story, and sells books. He probably took his time traveling and lived quite comfortably on the road because it wasn't until 1758 that he got back to Aberdeen. Finally, he starts looking for family. Sources on his family are few and far between, but I've read somewhere that his mother had passed away since he was kidnapped, and I read somewhere else that he found his brother and a few cousins who all testified that they recognized him. I couldn't find much else on any of his relatives. Now, I mentioned the word testify. Don't worry, I'm getting to that. Just because Peter was back in Aberdeen, he didn't stop dressing up like an Indian and selling books. Well, as it happened, he remembered the name of one of the people who kidnapped him, and he had no problem saying it. Well, the kidnapper, who also happened to be one of the city officials, caught wind of this pretty quick. Peter was arrested one day in June, and all his books were confiscated. They charged him with libel and slander, gave him a very rigged trial, and put him in the local jail, Tolbooth Prison, now converted into a museum. His books were publicly burned in the town square. He was fined and forced to sign a legal document saying that the parts of his book incriminating the man were fiction before they let him go. Just for good measure, after this, they banished him from the city. Well, what now? I guess I'll go live in Edinburgh. He went there and opened up a coffee house right under Parliament House. Being so close to Parliament, it became a hotspot for lawyers to visit after work. See where I'm going with this? He made some friends who had an intimate knowledge of the legal system. They looked at his story and encouraged him to sue the magistrates of Aberdeen using the Edinburgh court system. He said, well, why not, and went ahead with it. And he won. The judges found unanimously in Peter's favor, ruling that the Provost of Aberdeen, 4 of the Bailies, and the Dean of Guild, nice title, were to pay him £100 in damages for his false imprisonment. But that wasn't all. That trial was just about false imprisonment, and appealing the slander charges. His next court target was Mr. William Fordyce, one of the judges found guilty in the previous case, whom Peter accused of kidnapping. First, the case was tried in their local Aberdeenshire. Fordyce, of course, was good friends with the judge, even having dinner with him the night before the trial. He got off scot-free. Wonder why? Okay, back to Edinburgh. Public, class, court case. Import judges. Import evidence. Public, static, void, blah blah blah. Judges equals new judges. Evidence document equals new evidence. Literally a piece of paper detailing the exact amount of money each child was sold for in the New World. Not sure how Peter got a hold of this, but yeah, that was a literal piece of evidence presented in this court case. Judges.examine document. Closing brackets. Compile courtcase.java. Run courtcase.jar. Processing. Processing. The court finds William Fordyce to be guilty of kidnapping. He is ordered to pay Peter Williamson £200 in damages. God save King George! Yes, in December 1763, he won his second court victory for a grand total of £300 plus legal fees in winnings. This amounted to a modest fortune. What did he do with it? Well, he opened up a tavern on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, and he commissioned a big wooden figure of him wearing an Indian costume to be put on the street corner to attract customers. It seems like that venture went well because 5 years later, in 1769, he also opened up his own print shop. Around this time, he taught himself printing, invented a portable printer for his own convenience, and invented a waterproof ink that could be used to stamp linens. Then, a few years later, in 1773, he completed a street directory for the city of Edinburgh, which was basically a map of all the places and addresses in the city. A lot of online sources talk about this like it was its own accomplishment, but I think that brings down the value of his purpose for doing it. In 1774, Peter started a business offering to deliver anything up to 3 pounds in weight up to 1 mile from the city centre. This was the first post office in Edinburgh, and he called it Williamson's Penny Post because it only cost a penny per package. He hired a crew of 4 mailmen and gave them hats that numbered 1, 4, 8, and 16 to make the business look bigger than it was. And then he opened up several locations throughout the city. This continued until 1793 when the venture was bought out by the entity that would later become the Royal Mail. They paid Peter £25 up front and gave him a yearly pension of 25 shillings. And that's how Scotland got mail. No joke. Awesome, right? Peter married a woman named Jean Wilson, daughter of John Wilson, in 1777, but they divorced after 11 years. He spent the remainder of his life running that tavern on the Royal Mile. Some sources say he became an alcoholic during his late life. He died in 1799 of liver disease, and was buried in the Old Colton Burial Ground in Edinburgh. The grave is currently unmarked, but one of the websites I used told me Edinburgh tour guides are able to point out the general location. And this is why I love this time period. There are so many people who have interesting stories like this, and even someone who spent the first half of their life going between one kidnapping and another can go on to contribute some cool new inventions to the printing industry and start the first post office in Edinburgh. You go, Peter.
The northern lights of old Aberdeen mean home, sweet home to me. The northern lights of Aberdeen are what I long to see. I've been a wanderer all of my life, and many a sight I've seen. Godspeed the day when I'm